Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you who are in transition so far as gender is concerned. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is June 7th, year 2022, and the time is 3 p.m. Pacific time. Welcome, one and all. I'm so happy to be sharing a space with my best friend and yours, Caitlin Jenner. Remember her? Celebrity de jour. Well, let me put her off the cover here. Yeah, that's much better. uh, we're going to have some fun today, as you can tell, because in full snarky mode today. And I've set it down to like three cities: DC, New York, and Los Angeles, but you could also throw in the Silicon Valley. It's kind of it's not random, but I think these are the three polarities or axes, let's call them, of celebritydom. And I refer to it, of course, as a celebrity circle jerk. And it's little more than that. Now, the hard part comes to figure out a way to not just wean people away from this straitjacket of self celebratory, masturbatory worship of these miscreants, but to come up with a replacement, a solution. And it shouldn't be that hard because we've only been in the world of the Pentagon Valley for maybe one generation at most. The internet is still fairly new. So it's still within our cultural memory, our social memory. And even for the people who were riding high in the peak years of Vanity Fair magazine, they have a memory of I guess they'd be called millennials, right? They have a memory of a pre internet age that they're carrying into their 40s and 50s. This is what I call the John Hughes Breakfast Club generation. And these are the people that I think we can still salvage because their working years, they're in their prime working years right now, professional working years. And they're kind of straddling these two eras, and they are probably the what I consider to be prospectively the second greatest generation. The first one was the World War II people who were fighting kinetic wars against fascism. Now we're fighting a genetic war against bio tyranny or biofascism. So I have great hopes for them, and whatever assistance I can lend so far as my own analytical ability, I want to certainly offer that service to you free of charge. And I say free because these people they're used to freebies. Profligate spending was their claim to fame. And I'm speaking specifically of one individual. He's not just the only one, though, but his name's Dana Brown. I picked up this book, Dilettante, and the subtitle is True Tales of Excess, Triumph, and Disaster. Of course, you can't have triumph without disaster or disaster without triumph. And it was all very well, you might expect, very well reviewed, including the top blurb on the page. I didn't realize the significance of it until I started reading the book. But the top blurb goes to Pulitzer Prize winner and New York Times best-selling author of Friday Night Lights. I'll have to read that, even though I really despise Buzz Bissinger. He used to go by A.E. Bissinger or something like that. By the way, speaking of initials, this book is really similar to J.D. Vance's book. This is like the story of some hayseed, some kid who comes out of nowhere and all of a sudden is riding high at the highest level of his world. In this case, we're talking about publishing, magazine publishing. J.D. Vance, of course, Yale Law School, and beyond that, he'll probably wind up as president of the United States. Another synthetic creation, by the way. Notice the theme here: synthetic creations. I think we're beginning to understand the pattern, and once we have that under our belt, then we could figure out ways to forestall it and recruit everyday people, real people, not the circle jerks that we've been given since, I'd say consistently since the Clinton regime. The Bushes, we kind of knew what their background, right? Elite, skull and bones deal and all that. Clinton kind of snuck up on us. I even fell for it at the beginning. By the time Barama showed up, I had his number. I'd done my study. And by the time Trump shows up, well, it's a celebrity fest. He comes out of reality TV. By the way, Dana Brown hates Donald Trump, and for that reason, I should probably support Trump because not that I like Trump or want to promote him or have some sort of sentimental attraction, but again, my strategy is to have elites fight amongst each other because when they're trying to outgun each other, then that gives us, we little people breathing room. Anyway, there's a lot of material to cover here, so let me proceed here because if we don't really take this seriously and attack these problems aggressively, fairly soon we're going to be all living on the universal basic income, right? That schedule, and as I discussed in the previous talk, tongue in cheek, partially, but not really. All orgasms are going to be rationed. And by the way, I've been reading my Robert Heinlein. We were talking about science fiction. I'm going to allude to Hugo Gernsback in a little bit. But in reading Robert A. Heinlein, his background and his just sort of orgiastic approach to sex, he's really a horn dog. And that's in keeping with the whole science fiction agenda. What post Hugo Gernsback? I'm not talking about Jules Verne or some earlier examples of. I'm talking about American science fiction, specifically maybe Anglo-British science fiction, but mostly American science fiction because it is related to naval intelligence and possibly CIA and maybe with a little bit of influence from MI5 or MI6. And I mention that because the publication we're talking about today, Vanity Fair, again, this is speculative. If I'm putting out a hypothesis, I have no definitive proof at this point, but hypotheses are okay, right? So long as you say, this is what I'm working on, it still remains to be demonstrated. But my contention is that Vanity Fair since 1995 or maybe a year or two later. I'm not sure the exact turning point. It probably from the time that the editor, Graydon Carter, who, by the way, is Canadian subject, he's not even an American. And I mention that because so-called American publishing is run and owned and operated and managed by a bunch of foreigners, right? All this Chicom talk is probably put out there by these British Canadian intelligence to put the stink on the Chinamen, where it's really the Anglo-Saxon conurbation or this group, this complex that's really destroying America. I mean, the Chinese are not our friends necessarily, but blame the Chinamen. I mean, it's an old formula going back to the middle part of the 19th century. I mean, the U.S. Congress even passed legislation to make sure that no more Chinamen come in to the United States. They only started letting them in when the old Nazis started to age out and they needed some new intellectual labor. So they brought in the Chinamen and they brought in the coolie from India, right? That's where coolies were originally supposed to be Indians, not Chinese, but generically they're cool. And now, of course, we are all coolies, right? Or getting close to it. So, some of us more quickly than others. And we want to avoid that because the middle class is the way to go. And America has been at that point before. We have a memory of that. I grew up in that uh, level of society and social uh, solidity and advancement. I'm not trying to romanticize it. They had its problems, of course. So let's proceed. I don't want to live in a 200 square foot capsule. I don't want to have to rely on teledildonics or these cam girls, right? Have you seen that? I was checking out this cam girl site, and I swear to you that I did not buy any tokens. There, you have to put your money, whatever it is, currency, Bitcoin. I don't even know if they take Bitcoin into tokens, and then there are these women and also men and couples, whatever your heart desires or your growing desires. You can pick someone who's in a little capsule type environment with a cam on, who are camming. It's a verb now, right? If Vanity Fair were still on its game, they would do a whole issue devoted to celebrity camming, because camming has supplanted Hollywood, the beautiful people, as it used to be called in the 60s. Camming has supplanted that whole rotten, worm eaten world called Hollywood celebrityhood, right? Anyway, we're gonna get to that in a moment with relish, I might add. So that brings us today's talk about Vanity Fair. Most of you are aware of Project Mockingbird, and that's where the main journals from Washington Compost and New York Times eventually. When the Sulzberger family was running the New York Times, there was I won't say exactly a firewall because they played ball with the establishment, but at least there was a proprietary sense that, hey, our family name is tied to the New York Times. That, and same with the New Washington Compost, the Graham family, and of course, I know that they were connected. Old man Graham was the first head of the World Bank. I know all that. All right. So we're talking about relatively speaking, but today it is lock, stock, and barreled, controlled by the again. This is a hypothesis. Lock, stock, and barrel controlled by these intelligence entities. So about Project Mockingbird. Now I'll have you understand that it's been intensified, but I'm just using that as a marker to give us a framework here, right? Because when you read Annie Jacobson, you read about these CIA operations, right? You think it's something in the past. So I'm not going to call it Mockingbird. We'll have to, you and me, maybe we'll come up with something new. But there's an emerging, because Mockingbird was creating fake stories in real society and culture and politics, right? But we've made a shift. It's a simulacrum we're talking about. So it's not even a mocking deal. It's a simulation. It's a simulacrum. And there's a theorist that all the intellectuals and the policy people know. His name is Baudrillard, right? Who talked about simulations. And by the way, all the big cheeses of down in Silicon Valley, the DARPA Valley, they know about these literary theorists, right? Peter Thiel studied with one of them at Stanford, and they took their ideas and they said we can apply this to the virtual space that we are constructing with all this fantastic Pentagon hardware. The content of it, yes, I'll use the C word, content. It used to be called writing, but we'll call it content, right? The content of it is going to approximate, or not initially it'll approximate, but eventually it'll become one to one with the simulacra. So that's where we're at now. Well, not quite. We're about 1 minute to midnight. And by the way, even if we meaning the general public, are pushed over into the simulated society, right? Second Life, right? By Linden Laboratories in San Francisco. I'm just using them as a example of what we're talking about, simulation. Even though that the majority of the population gets pushed onto that reservation, some of us who understand what's going on will escape the reservation, right? Just like the guy in Brave New World. But you have to understand that what the simulation, the ones who are following the Vanity Fair Oscar Award red carpet strut, they're already lost, right? They're gone, right? It's a triage situation. Don't worry about them, and don't even wasting your time trying to tell them about what's going on. Let them take care of themselves, which is not going to happen, right? So there's a new book, 2022, as I mentioned. It's called Dilettante, and it's by. Let me just tell you a little bit about Dana Brown, right? He comes from a family of assimilated Jews, and he sends about 3 or 4 or 5 pages about how that's part of his psychology. I wrote about it myself in Servitors of Empire. The difference is that assimilated Jews can pass. They change their name to Brown, so that even though it's Brown, they can pass as quote unquote white. And he's a handsome, good-looking guy, like Paul Newman. He's Jewish. He's got blue eyes, but he can pass for a goy, right? I can, and I'm not complaining about it. So I can't really change my name. But anyway, the point is that it's part of this servitor psychology that all the different groups who come to America seem to have weighing on them. Even the editor in chief, Graydon Carter, talks about, woe is me, I'm from Canada. So, I'm just like a guy with my nose pressed against the window to the great America down south. And man, when I came to New York, I really wanted to make my. I'm sure that same thoughts are going through Trevor Noah, the colored, that's what they call them, or used to, down in South Africa, the colored supposed comedian who's more of a propagandist. You know what I'm talking about. He's on Comedy Central or comedy, whatever it is. Those unfunny people, right? Stephen Colbert, that whole world there. So it's that servitor kind of consciousness because he didn't go to college. He's a terrible. He's kind of like J.D. Vance. He couldn't even spell. He's telling the reader he couldn't even spell. He might have been dyslexic. I don't know. He never mentions the D word, but he was a loser, right? He was a club kid. He moved to New York and wanted to hang out in CBGBs and become part of the what remained of the punk era. It was a very short-lived moment in time, and he had a band going while he was the personal assistant to none other than Graydon Carter, right? As I already mentioned, we'll see him in action. I promise not to give you too much of Graydon Carter because he doesn't exude much personal charisma. I think one-on-one, according to Dan Brown, he's really charming, engaging. He's a lot of fun, great to have drinks with and smoke and tell stories and gossip. And man, you're doing it in New York City on the Condé Nast publishing arm on their expense account. Cab rides, they had limos waiting outside of the Vanity Fair headquarters. I think it was on Park Avenue, 395 Park Avenue, the high rent district. Uh, they were there on call, not on call. They didn't have to call. They were there in case some editor felt they needed to take a run down to Chinatown or something or wherever else, get a massage, or who knows, right? The point is that they had guys like Brown because, man, it's like joining the Hashashin or the assassins, right? You're a poor goat farmer, and all of a sudden they give you some drugs, and you wind up in the kingdom. You're having this hallucination of beautiful virgins and milk and honey, right? And you're going to kill for that, for you're the leader of that group, right? The Ishmaelis, the Hashashin. And their world is very much like a cult, drug fueled, visionary, celebrity, drunk, and power tripping world. And that's exactly why Graydon Carter picked Dana Brown because he was very susceptible to. If you're a rich kid, if you're someone from a trust fund, that's not really a novelty to you. Your parents are filthy rich, so you're not going to be corrupted in the same way. You have a more of a sense of entitlement, but Dana Brown has something to prove, right? He's a by he keeps telling us in this book, I'm a nobody. And he's also very conscious rather, of explaining that, hey, it was a good life and don't hate me for it. I know that people have it a lot harder than I do. He's very self-conscious about the privileges that, excuse me, that he was able to enjoy. So a little bit more about Vanity Fair before I proceed. Now, as you might already have learned from previous talks, I'm a magazine freak. I started subscribing to my own magazines before I think it was out of high school because I had a paper out. I got $20 a month, and they had these little and in college, of course, they had these little cards to get you hooked. I guess early on, they had these cards that were in the book bags, or they'd even have them thumb thumbtack to the announcement boards at school for these subscriptions to all these great magazines, these top rated magazines, really cheap for students. So I said, wow, that's almost nothing. So I subscribed to all of this. And because, as I mentioned before, I wanted to be a writer, right? So I said, well, let me read the best in writing. So I've been a magazine freak all of my life because my parents were magazine freaks, as you well know, right? And not so much books, but the monthly magazines and the weekly, and of course the daily paper. Our paper was the Los Angeles Times. That came 7 days a week, so I was out of that type of a literate environment for the middle class, lower middle class. That was the norm for working class, lower middle class. It was not special to my household. That's the way most people live today. They live by the cell phone, which I'll get to in a moment, which because it ironically, not ironic, maybe purposely, it destroyed Vanity Fair. I'm getting ahead of myself, but the introduction of the iPhone in 2007 led to the demise of print journalism, including Vanity Fair. And with that went all the almost limitless expense accounts, all the partying, all the open liquor tabs at the bar, and all the meals and the celebrity parties and the red carpet, the trips out to L.A. to get set up for the Oscar week, right? And of course, Dana Brown eventually loses his job at the ripe old age of what, 45 or something like that. I don't think he's even 50 years old now. I'm sure he's going to touch down somewhere. He's probably going to become a contributing editor at CIANN or the new MI6 Times or one of these other intelligence agencies that passes news organizations. Even though he does a mea culpa at the end and tries to get us to feel sorry for us, for him rather, for his transgressions. But he was enjoying the hell out of himself as it was going down. He'd be the first to admit it. So I'm a magazine junkie, and I talked about Dominic Dunn in a previous talk, and his sister-in-law in particular, Joan Didion. Take a look at that one on my playlist. It's called Diddled by Didion, who, as I discovered in preparing that talk, her family were prominent Sacramento landowners. They're the part of the Donner Party that resorted to cannibalism. Remember coming over the Sierra? You know the story. They were part of the Donner Party that took a different path, and they got to. I have a suspicion that they were probably the ones who were faster at eating other party members, and they're the ones that made it back over there to Sacramento. So that's his sister-in-law. John Gregory Dunn is his older brother. He was always competitive towards him. And Dominic Dunn always felt that he never really measured up to his father, who was a highly decorated World War II hero. I think he was a medical doctor. Well, he was just one of those old school guys who did everything, lived life hard. And so Dominic Dunn was kind of, and I know this because there's a documentary about Dominic Dunn. It's very well done, and he's a very sympathetic person, even though he's part of the elite. And I have to like slightly dial back my own bias towards people of privilege, right? And then you've got your Christopher Hitchens, right? I'm telling you, this is an Anglo, by that I mean British, a British American, and you got to throw in Canada, which is an arm of the British Empire, threatening us at our northern border, right? Even though we like the truckers, right? We like the truckers, the Canadian truckers, right? But that's not the same that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the British Empire that never really went away. It reformulated itself, and it got more slick by going into the slicks. That's the slick magazines like Vanity Fair, like the New Yorker, like the Condé Nast, N-A-S-T publishing empire. It was headed by Cy Newhouse, first senior, then Cy Newhouse Jr. And I've been following this particular story for quite a while. I'm looking at my notes in my own little notebook dated December 29, year 2016. Wow, years later, I'm referring back to my notes. I'm glad I'm kept them. And I talk about Project Mockingbird, and I mentioned Anna Wintour, who later took on the New Yorker. She snookered out. She edged out Graydon Carter. No, I'm sorry. It wasn't Anna Wintour. It was Tina Brown that did that. She's another British asset who runs American publishing. Right now, I already told you Springer runs American academic publishing as well. That's a German company, and they had ties with the Third Reich, and of course, they had ties with Weimar Republic too. They have ties with anybody who's in power, right? So, Chili Charlie was Anna Wintour's father, who was a newspaperman himself, and Anna Wintour is known as Nuclear Winter, right? Her brother's in the publishing field as well. And then you know the story about Anderson Cooper and all these other, I call them transgenerational or multi-generational Mockingbird characters like that. So yeah, according to my notes of 2017, October 1st, S.I. Newhouse, they called him Cy around the office, Jr. died. It says he hired Wintour and these other people, right? And this is published in the Hollywood Reporter. So I've been following this story for quite a while, and books like this help me to fill in the blanks, of course, some of the missing qualitative data, if you want to call it that. So you got Christopher Hitchens, who's a British Oxford trained, by the way, intellectual of a family of intellectuals, including a brother. I forgot his name, but Christopher Hitchens is the atheist, and his brother is the believer. And the reason I mention this is typically in the British intelligence slash journalist slash literary world, the siblings occupy every single part of the ideological spectrum, from worship of Hitler to diehard British patriot, right? That's the Mitford sisters. And the Coburn, Alexander Coburn, right? One's a leftist and one is a more of a libertarian. They all have a little role, an ideological slot that has been decided for them. They work that slot very well. Christopher Hitchens worked the Trotskyist, that is sort of a post-communist, maybe Gramscian, if you will, a British socialist, let's call it, angle. That's Christopher Hitchens. Excuse me a moment. And lesser known is one. These are writers who I used to read because I had a subscription to Vanity Fair in its golden years. So that's why I want to read this book. I mean, because that was probably my favorite magazine of that time, when Dana Brown was there as first as a gopher, and eventually he becomes an editor. He gets up to the editor ranks, right, after being I think 3 years of the tea boy, the coffee boy over at headquarters under Graydon Carter, right, who was his mentor. I like the work of Maureen Orth, Orth, and I mention her name because she wrote an incredible feature on Andrew Cunanan. In truth, it's pronounced Cunanan. See, this is something the Vanity Fair people could not ever come close to approaching so far as my cultural forensics knowledge, because they're in the little world of East Coast establishment, right? I'm on the Pacific Rim here. I didn't call him Andrew Cunanan. I call him Andrew Cunanan because he's Filipino. All right. He's from Rancho Filipino down in Rancho San Bernardo down in San Diego. Right. But he was a wannabe. He was he had a servitor consciousness. He was reading all these fashion magazines, right, and learned everything by rote about Gianni Versace and all these, super Euro trash, Amero trash. He memorized his stuff and hung out at all the night spots from San Francisco down to the Hillcrest area in San Diego or Los Angeles, Boys Town, New York City, Christopher Street, you name it. He even went to Lake Como and went to party with Gianni Versace, right? That was Andrew Cunanan. And his father was in the U.S. And the reason I mentioned the Filipino angle is because the Filipino boys were brought onto the Navy ships as bugger bait for the officers. They were the white-coated cooks and servers to the admirals and the chief of staff. Right? There's a great Tom Wolfe essay about the Filipino cabinet. By the way, that whole position and staffing of Filipinos in the U.S. Navy has been eliminated because they realized how racist it was, right? So they let everybody do it now. But before, that job was for Filipinos, and part of the bugger contract was to turn over your children to these mind controlled out. That was what Andrew Cunanan was really about. But Maureen Orth couldn't get there because she does not know the milieu like I do. That's why there's a space for me in independent journalism, a huge space, and I'm claiming it because Vanity Fair is no longer a factor. I am a factor. Professor Hamamoto YouTube channel is a factor. I am a YouTube celebrity. Get used to it. In fact, I have all kinds of revenue generating schemes based on the Vanity Fair model. I want to start a celebrity underwear service, right? Since we're such a celebrity steeped culture, we're junkies for celebrity. I'm going to solicit underwear from all your favorite celebrities. And since I am a YouTube celebrity, I'm going to donate these, right? This is my Simpsons boxer shorts. Yeah, I think they're clean. I have a hobby, by the way. I go to Marshalls and look at the underwear racks, and I find the worst, the most cheesy underwear that I can. And this is where I got it: Marshalls or TJ Maxx, something like that. Anyway, I'm going to collect celebrity underwear, and we're going to auction it off and give the proceeds to a worthy charity. It's probably run by the Clinton Foundation. You know where I'm going. By the way, that was a spoof. But I do go to Marshalls and find cheesy underwear. Uh, so you got Maureen Orth, and you got a whole masthead of so-called contributing editors. I didn't know this until I read the book, but they're on salary, and all they have to do is produce maybe 4 stories a year, right? Of maybe 2,000 words. I mean, I could do that in like a day. I do it twice a week here, right? I do it, they're always trying to figure out idea. I have no problem coming with story ideas. I'm an idea dynamo. But then the reason I mention this is because it's not about productivity. It's about payoffs. It's about putting money into certain hands who are part of the intelligence establishment. Do you understand? This My knowledge of how the New World Order and the One World Order and these publishing entities and the university, the corporations, my knowledge of that helps me read between the lines, right? This is fog, this is smokescreen stuff, but I can still use it as a background to discuss how these people fund themselves by while achieving the goal of keeping the population distracted by celebrity and also enhancing their own perceived value to society, where in truth it is worth zero. It's worth less than zero, to quote one of those synthetic novels that were promoted by the New York publishing industry, elevating this guy named Bret Ellis Easton, right? Making him a synthetic hero of literary endeavor. And I think it was made into a movie as well, right? See how the circle jerk, right? It's more like it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it is an orb, right? So Graydon Carter comes from one of these. We'll have to dig a little bit more, right? I'll leave that for people to look at ancestry.com. But for now, the exoteric knowledge that we've been able to dig up on him is he was editor of something called the Canadian Review. Talk about undistinguished. I'm not to knock it. It might be a great publication, and just because I haven't heard of it doesn't mean that it sucks. But not something that you would think would be on the resume of a Graydon Carter, right? He's one of those guys who have 2 names that are interchangeable. He could be called Carter Graydon, or he could be called Graydon Carter, right? That's why I always thought he was a New England, Yale bred and born person. But he's a parvenu, as they say, or a wannabe, or a servitor, as I've mentioned. He moved to New York, wants to make it, right? He's a Canadian, big in America, big in the United States. He wrote for Time Life, right? You know their background with intelligence. I'm sure his father had a contact or his mother, somebody. He founded Spy Magazine, right? Is that a tell or what? It's called Spy Magazine, right? Come on, please, Spy Magazine. And by the way, magazines are expensive propositions. You can't just found a magazine. You got to have an angel. You got to have investors. It costs a lot of money. Where'd that money come from? I haven't found out yet, but that's a question you might want to investigate or ask about these people who come out of nowhere, seemingly. Yeah, they always come out of nowhere, always come from humble origins. They always have a good legend behind them, right? Just like J.D. Vance. And then, as I mentioned before, he was passed over for editor of New Yorker by Tina Brown, another British asset, replacing William Shawn, I think, who's another legendary editor. This is the before celebrity editors were even imagined. No one would think of an editor as being a celeb in their own right. This is William Shawn. Now, this is the same William Shawn, by the way, who dared to publish Hiroshima by John Hersey. Right. That originally started out as maybe a one or two parter in the New Yorker. William Shawn thought it was so important for the American people to really have a honest look at what the bomb represented, not just in a philosophical peacenik terms, but to the people of Hiroshima itself, from their point of view, from the victims' POV. That was William Shawn. That was John Hersey. I mention this because this is the same New Yorker today, which is now just an arm of the intelligence agencies, maybe going all the way to NATO. Maybe they're taking orders from Brussels for, I don't know, but it's not the old New Yorker that we grew up with or aspired to or read or had this cachet to it, probably deservedly so. Even though, yeah, I know, right? We know about J.D. Salinger and what's his name? Catch 22, Joseph Heller and Kurt Von, all these people, even though they're all part of that whole publishing scene, even though they might not have published for the New Yorker per se, right? They come out of that world. So you got my pretty good idea that magazines are very important, not just to me, but to American society. And then not just the aspirational class like myself, but to people who are in the fray, because that's their way of doing intelligence work on their competitors and their peers, seeing who's up and who's down. And speaking of peers, we're going to start moving into the 90s, right, with Courtney Love and Harvey Weinstein and the real turning point. Now, forensically, I've determined, I'll get to this in a moment, forensically, I've determined that the year 1995 was the turning point where contemporary celebrity culture became as so big as it is today in 2022. There's some signs of it changing, by the way, right? Just like Dana Brown thought the party was going to last forever and he was out by age 45. These people who are riding high now think it's going to last forever, but they too will be thrown out. So this part of the self-celebration I'm talking about. Before I proceed, I want you to share this with me because I want to cleanse our palate from Caitlyn Jenner to
Oscar night, it's Hollywood, it's Vanity Fair, it just makes sense.
It's awards season, and it wouldn't be complete without an invite to Vanity Fair's famous Oscar party. From how to choose your dress to where to store your golden statue, here's our cheat sheet on how the A-list rings in the big night.
You want to make sure that it fits. You want to make sure that there are no weird, it's like your wedding, but it's happening on a regular night.
When you put on the right thing, you know it. It's sort of like falling in love. You just know.
It's Oscar night, it's Hollywood, it's Vanity Fair.
By the way, that last woman you saw, Greta Gerwig, she's from Sacramento, and I've been looking at her movies. Her first major feature, Birdie, is really good, and it takes place here in Sacramento. And now she's on the red carpet, and she has made a couple of fairly big budget feature films. If that's your aspiration, even if you come from Sacramento, California, the most unglamorous city in the United States of America, it's also the state capital of California, you can make it. right? Just like Dana Brown or J.D. Vance. That is the beauty. You can come from the Gujarat in India and you can become a billionaire. I mean, that's real. That stuff is real. Now, I've seen it. I know people of these backgrounds, and it's not a lie, and it's almost next to impossible to do that in any other country in the world except here in the US. And for nothing else, we want to see that dynamism take place, this talent, right? It's and talent only exists when everybody's competing fairly, and there is some semblance of a talent meritocracy. But if you're giving all the jobs to people who are your friends, your buddy, like your Jared Kushner or something like that, the whole level, the quality level, leadership, money making, cultural product, it just gets really, really low, and before you know it, you're third world, right? And here's a good example or a bad example of a good example. Here's someone whose mother came from India, her father was Jamaican, and like what? She's vice president of the United States, and then she's rocking an award. Here she is herself, the future president of the United States.
To Nickelodeon, and thank you to the young leaders for being so incredible and for all that you do and will do. From social distancing to remote learning, you've been through a lot this year, but through it all, you young leaders have really stepped up. You've worn your masks, you've helped out your neighbors, you've been role models in your community. When I was young, my mother used to say, Kamala, don't just sit around and complain about things, do something about it. Well, you are doing something. You are creating.
So that's your vice president, not mine. Kamala Harris, the immigrant success story, right? And of course, she's on Nickelodeon, and they're getting into the heads of the youngsters. Yeah, uh, kill all your parents, kill all the old people, because the tomorrow belongs to you, right? Remember that scene in Cabaret, right, with Joel Grey and yeah, all the Hitler Jugend just spontaneously stand up and say, yeah, the future belongs to us, right? So get them young, get them at Nickelodeon, which is another intelligence asset. So you got Kamala Harris. Kate, let me, before I run out of time, talk about some of the figures that you and I know. Right? Let's bring it up to date. We're talking about 95, right? The pivotal year. That's when that famous cover, the Hollywood issue came out, right? The Vanity Fair Hollywood issue. It's typically, I think, the newsstand sales are like 350,000 to 400,000 per issue. It's published once a month, so those were standard. But the Hollywood issues usually went up to like 500,000, maybe sometimes 700,000, or some of these special covers. It was shot, by the way, by the famed celebrity photographer Annie Leibovitz, who started out in Rolling Stone. I remember her from San Francisco-based Rolling Stone, I think. I associated with Rolling Stone, and then she went on to bigger and better things. But she did a special cover, a photograph of Demi Moore, nude and pregnant. Remember that one? And I have that somewhere. I might have thrown it away. I don't keep these publications around unless it's something really special. So anyway, that's the era, 95. Demi Moore, Sylvester Stallone, Michelle Pfeiffer, who's from Garden Grove, California, by the way, in Orange County, Bruce Willis, Kim Basinger, right? And we've, all followed the career of her ex-husband, right? He's calling drunk. Oh, yeah, you ungrateful child, we love that. That's part of the celebrity culture that also these people also put out, because they're also intelligence agencies in their own right. They leak these telephone conversations and phone hacks and whatnot. So you got Kevin Costner, you got the VF Vanity Fair covers in the 80s. They were beginning to be pushed aside by the Gen X, and then there's new ones coming in. They're probably all going to be transgender or post-gender illegal immigrant children, right? With machetes, right? They're going to be photographed with machetes in their hands. They're going to be like 10 years old. So Gen X, you better watch out, because make sure that your head is still attached to your neck stock, because they're coming after, the little children are coming after you with the machetes. So you got the Gen X people moving into now. You got Brad Pitt. Yeah, I remember him in what's that film with Susan Sarandon, right? The Caper movie. I forgot the name. But you'll remember Kate Winslet, Keanu Reeves, right? Sandra Bullock, Leonardo DiCaprio. I remember him with Johnny Depp and What's Eating Gilbert Grape. That was a good movie. That was an independent movie. And then look what he's been. Gwyneth Paltrow. She's a creature of the 90s. And look what she's gotten us into today. She's into spiritualism in 2022. I mean, she is putting such a psyops on us. She's trying to sell us candles that smell like her cooch, right? Oh, yeah. I'm Gwyneth Paltrow. All right. You got Ben Affleck, right? Who comes from the Stella and Mira, Jeremy Mira, right? And Ann Stella. Or maybe it's the other Stella. Stella and Mira. There are Ed Sullivan staples. You got Uma Thurman. I like her father, Professor Robert Thurman. He's a Sanskrit scholar and all that. So that's, to me, when I hear Uma Thurman, I give her a pass, because that's her daddy. Matt Damon. And these other synthetic actors. Natalie Portman, the Israeli asset, right? She went to Harvard, right? Sometimes they take a little sabbatical, like Jodie Foster. They go to Yale or Harvard and get a degree. Heath Double Ledger and Kate Blanchett. So are you with me? We're in the 90s now, moving into the 20s. So here's Dana Brown. He comes out of nowhere. He's sent to L.A. by Vanity Fair, and I'm reading right from the book. It says, so much film and television was shot and set in L.A. that it felt like the center of the universe. All the cool popular culture that was on the kids' radar seemed to be blossoming there. Los Angeles, a visible part of its DNA, skateboarding and surfing, shopping malls, Guess Jeans, Van Halen, Repo Man, and LA Punk, Gen X. Yeah, by the way, I've been recently revisiting Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Right, that's Sean Penn. Remember Spicoli? The funniest scene to me was when he orders a pizza in his class, and his little checkerboard Vans his sneakers, right? Skateboard shoes, right? That's what I remember. I don't remember Phoebe Cates' breasts in this film for some reason, but Dana Brown does, because he was in that age group. I had aged out of all this stuff by the time this movie came on, but this is my field, right? And so I look at it anyway. So her breastages did not, Phoebe Cates did not register in my mind. However, her uncle registered in my mind, because here's my story. Here's my 6 degrees of separation with Phoebe Cates. Her uncle, Gil Case, was my dean at the UCLA School of Film, Television, and Theater. They brought this industry guy in to clean house and to take care of, because they have a production in. They also have so-called critical studies. That's what I was in. People who do the film history and criticism, television, and they do the intellectual work, and then the other people do the nurturing of the future generation of, or at least wannabes in the film industry. So Gil Cates ran that whole operation. He didn't stay very long and I was at a meeting to him, and he was very direct, very profane, and he reminded me kind of like of John Huston, old school guy. He was like dropping an F-bomb everywhere and just berating everybody on the faculty like we were gaffers, on a television set. And indeed, after he left being dean of the school, he went back to being the producer of the Academy Awards, right? Just as we saw here. He's gone now. I think he was fairly much retired before Vanity Fair came in and had their yearly Oscar party. But that was Gil Cates, and uncle of Phoebe Cates. Check it out on YouTube. Right? My brush with celebrity, of course, it's not really that difficult. If you're around as long as I am, you're going to run into people and have stories to go along with it, right? Um, okay, let me talk a little bit about the intelligence connection. And this is, again, these are inferences that I'm drawing. But on page 123, Dana Brown talks about one of his best friends at the office of Vanity Fair. And by the way, Graydon Carter seemed to be a hands-on editor. I think he really was an editor. He was not one of these gentlemen editors. He did look at copy. He read stories. He tried to generate ideas. Yeah, he had to have dinner with the agents and talent and all, and stroke egos, and probably engage in some unpleasant firings and disciplinary hearings and whatnot. But he seemed to be an old school, hands-on type editor. So his Dana Brown's best buddy at the headquarters, VF headquarters, was a guy named Hamilton South. So again, it's one of those guys whose given names could be a family name, Hamilton, right? Like Graydon, right? And nothing against that naming practice, right? Nothing against, that's part of your heritage. So, but anyway, that's a red flag to me, right? So anyway, he's an editor at large. He's on the masthead, but no one really knows what he did, from what I can tell. But according to Dana Brown, he had an incredible influence on Graydon Carter. Graydon Carter did not make a decision without Hamilton South. And by the way, that's him in the background. I think it's probably, he's a shadow character in the background. I don't think that was done accidentally. Nothing is done accidentally. Not a book cover, not anything when you're talking about this type of stuff. This is not a photo. He didn't jump in. There's not a photo bomb. That is Hamilton South right there in the shadows. But he was the guy, I think, who was the representative of MI6 or you name it, Office of Naval Intelligence, or the Royal Navy. I don't know. Some intelligence entity was there on site, making sure that all the people that they wanted to promote or hold down or disregard or defame, it was consistent, right? Because it's difficult to keep all the different names and players, especially since the deck chairs get shuffled continuously. You need someone like that to pass on the word from the intelligence aid. So that's another pillar of my argument that I'm constructing, that Vanity Fair is and probably is today an asset of British intelligence, probably. So they started to plummet. 2008, as I told you about the iPhone, they went down to 200,000 issues in the following year. They were running like 400,000. They almost dropped in half. And I think I dropped my subscription long before that. The editorials content started to go off track. I wasn't really much interested in reading anymore after the OJ trial. That was Dominic Dunn covered that for Vanity Fair. I'm sure that kept subscriptions up high because that was the big trial of the century, by the way. So they went out and they had to, Vanity Fair went out and had to figure out how to refigure itself. Now, here's where I think the squeeze was put on, right? The internet came in. The print journalists were not prepared for it. Graydon Carter, Dana Brown, who's a younger than Carter, of course, wasn't ready for it at all. So what they do is that, hey, man, you're running $100 million debt every single year. What are you going to do about it? Well, you're going to sign on to the Office of Naval Intelligence. They're going to provide the shortfall money that you're losing. You're going to get all those expense accounts restored, and you're going to make seven figures. That's what Graydon Carter, he was making $1 million something. He had a home, outside the city, of course. I don't know where, Connecticut. And I think he was living in Dakota for a while, right? The famed Dakota apartment. And I think that he later moved downtown, like Soho or something. But he had a nice home. He had a family too. He had like 3 or 4. He's still alive, by the way. Christopher Hitchens died at 61. And a lot of these people kicked the bucket pretty early, but he's still around. And while I'm on Christopher Hitchens, all right, as great a writer he was, great debater, one of the incredible minds, and really a superior critic so far as literature and culture is concerned. That's Christopher Hitchens. I think he was connected as well. And another tell for me is that he was stationed in D.C. Hitchens, even though he was a contributing editor for Vanity Fair and wrote almost every month there was a Christopher Hitchens article, and I read him. He was one of the attractions, right? Just like Dominic Dunn. And but guess where he lived? He lived in Kalorama in D.C. Does that ring a bell? That's where Obama lives. That's where all the movers and shakers. That's where the Georgetown Ladies Club lived. Deborah Davis wrote a book called Georgetown Ladies. That's where all the movers shakers was. So even though he was sort of the principled opposition to the establishment up until the latter part of his career, when he went pro-war, said, yeah, we've got to get rid of Saddam Hussein. We've got to go to war in Iraq. Yes, he became a hawk. And he, here he was a Trotskyist, right? And a anti-imperialist ostensibly. But he showed his true colors by the time he died. And so I think British asset, Christopher Hitchens. I never trusted him anyway. Like his writing. I read John Mortimer, the guy Rumpel of the Bailey, right? But I'm sure he's a royalist. He went to the boys' school, and I think Oxford or Cambridge, one of the two, right? But they give you a little bit of play. You get to play the renegade for the early part of your life, and then they reel you back, and or you show who you really are in your maturity, right? That's Christopher Hitchens. So let me conclude then with where we began last time with, remember this? This article came from a Hugo Gernsback journal. He's the father of science fiction, remember? Right? Born in Luxembourg, sent over here by probably the Habsburg, or maybe the House of Rothschild. I don't know. We got to look into his background. It started this magazine called Sexology, and this is published in 1950. This is my issue, by the way. I have this copy. This is a scan from my copy of Sexology 1954. I'm into magazines, I told you, especially since this feature was about Christine Jorgensen. This was a young man from the military in the 50s who became Christine, just like Caitlyn Jenner became transsexual, right? And where did he go? Christine Jorgensen or Christopher Jorgensen. He came out of the military. I think that was now that I understand more, I think he was recruited out of the military to go through a transsexual operation. They sent him to Sweden. That's where all the Nazi, we talk about paperclip in America, but the tons of paperclip Nazis went to Sweden and Denmark and Holland and the Netherlands. They also went to Soviet Union, right? Some of them went to Israel. And of course, there's tons of them in Latin America. So again, I think with Christine Jorgensen in 54, 55, 53, I don't know when the surgery was, like 53, something like that. That predates Caitlyn Jenner by decades. But finally, we have Vanity Fair validating it, right? With this famous cover article.
We're rearranging our chairs.
This is Amy Leibovitz who took the photo.
This gives me great pleasure to be here with Annie. We've worked together for almost a quarter of a century, mostly a smooth road. She is, I've never met anybody who works harder, who devotes more to her art. And, she's become the photographer of our age in the way that Avedon was of the previous age. From baby boomers to millennials, getting your photograph taken by Annie is one of the great totems of success in this country. She's just an amazing person to work with. And she has shot 3 of the great iconic covers of the last quarter century. And I think we should just open by talking about them a bit first.
Listen, when you said, let's do this, I said to myself, this was a great opportunity to sit and talk about Caitlyn, maybe.
You can do that.
Because I hadn't really talked about Caitlyn anywhere. And coincidentally, an art director friend of mine that I've known for many years,
we don't have to hear what Annie Leibovitz says. She's a good photographer, and she's obviously on board with the whole post-human agenda. They call it Caitlyn Jenner transgenderism, transsexualism, but it's post-humanism. It's something that Gernsback and his ilk and the Huxleys and the Hitchens family, probably going back generations, they're probably always on board. The whole Bloomsbury group, right? The literary set there, they're always on board with getting rid of the scum of the earth, the people who inhabited the Gujarat or China or Hong Kong or Japan. They had a hard time with the bloody Japas, who showed them a thing or two in Singapore and Malaysia. Right? So eventually they made peace with them and said, okay, we're going to include you as part of the Trilateral Commission, right? You're going to be the only non-European country as part of the Trilateral. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski, of course, right? And it's a Rockefeller initiative. But for the rest of the world, the African world, you're history, right? And by the way, we're not just talking about people of color, quote unquote. We're talking about all of humanity, and that includes even people of the so-called Caucasian race. They've showed their hand starting 2 years ago. They're going for all the marbles, right? So you can forget about anything about you, your identity, racial, gender, class, if you're wealthy or poor, what they're going for it all unless you are part of the self-proclaimed illuminist, right? And even then, most of those people, 99% of those people who think they're going to make it over, the readers, the aspirationals who read Vanity Fair magazine or who ran it, including Graydon Carter, you're going to be left outside of the 5-ton blast door, right? You're not going to be in that little cave that these people have dug for themselves down in New Zealand, down with Peter Jackson, right? So time is running out, and we're going to have a lot of fun in turning this around. It's a challenge. It's an intellectual challenge. It could be bloodless, right? Because, like I said, it's not about brute force kinetic warfare anymore. It's really mind wars. I'm sorry to use that term from that Satanist, but it's more of a head war. Let's call it. It's intellectual warfare. And all wars have been, by the way, from time immemorial. So we can beat them on that level. We can beat them with cultural forensics, with your assistance and your participation. So here we go, closing the full circle. That's why Graydon Carter eventually had to go in, throw his hand in with the globalists and the post-humanists, because the magazine was collapsing. His career is going down the tubes. And then here comes the rescue package. Oh, it's really too bad what iPhones are doing to print journalism. But here, we've got $100 million out of our black budget that we can give to you. It's all from the illicit dope trade and the human trafficking and all the transportation of nuclear weapons from country to country. The budget that you're talking about is just largely ceremonial. We're the real controllers here. We're NATO. We are the Pentagon. We're DARPA, right? And that's what happened to Vanity Fair. That's what happened to the Fortune 500 in American society. We're not out of the woods, but I think more people are understanding that. And the good part about it is that it's not a unipolar universe. The Davos people might think it is, but there's still Mother Russia out there saying, we ain't going along with it. And there's still tiny islands in the Pacific region, right? Micronesia. China was trying to buy them off. And no. We know what you're up to. Go away. You're not going to buy us out, right? So there's signs of resistance everywhere. And you know why? People are getting smarter. They're watching shows like this channel right here, right? I'm going to expand. I'm going to become a YouTube celebrity. Mark my words. And I'm going to start a reality television show called Celebrity Underwear Service. Right? See what it says? Homer Simpson says, Springfield rocks. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now get back to work. See you later.